I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, as the Apostle Paul talks about our relationship with the world in a different context, but a similar principle. The Apostle Paul writes to the saints in Corinth. He says to them, I wrote to you in a former epistle not to company with fornicators, yet not altogether with fornicators of this world, or the covetous, or idolaters, extortioners. And he says, if you do that, you must needs go out of the world. And these two verses, the amalgamation of these two verses, paint a beautiful picture of our existence in this world. We have to curb against becoming like the world and becoming or transforming ourselves to become like them. But yet we live in this world. We have to deal with the people in this world. And so thus, as we look at this lectureship and the things that have been set forth, we recognize the importance of the lessons that have been brought. We understand that we must achieve and maintain a righteous balance between living with the worldly and guarding against the things of which we have heard this week. The Christian is not immune to the effects of these teachings. As has been said many times before, these things are being taught in schools. These things are being taught by individuals on a regular basis. There are even some in our society, maybe even some of our friends or co-workers or those who are in our social circle. They believe these things even though they do not know the authors of these books, even though they do not know all of the tenets of the authors. They believe these things and they practice them blindly. And so we're not immune to these things. And the Lord has given us His Word to serve as a moral anchor in times of immoral anarchy. And that is where we are in society today. There is an immoral anarchy that reigns, especially in our nation. My assignment today is to talk about Betty Friedan. Betty Friedan, we might rightly say that Betty Friedan is an individual who contributed to the feminist movement. She is by no means the pioneer of the feminist movement, but she contributed to the feminist movement. It's my aim to provide a broader approach to the subject. Betty Friedan certainly served as one of the catalysts of modern feminism, but she was not alone and certainly not the first. Now, the topic of feminism is complicated for two reasons. It's complicated because some of their plights, especially first-wave feminism, does have some biblical merit, and we'll look at some of those things. But then also, feminism has undergone several facelifts. Feminism has gone from one thing to another, and then from that thing to something completely different. And so therefore, to address feminism in its entirety is rather hard and complicated at times because they keep moving the goalposts. And so our approach must be fair and balanced, and above all things, it must be scriptural. And so our aim this afternoon is to do two things. It is first to present the facts about feminism. Let me say off the bat right here, it's not my intent to misrepresent any who hold this view with inaccurate information. So with that in mind, I sourced all of my information about feminism from feminism sources, from those who are self-proclaimed feminists. So when I quote about feminism, it's going to come from those who say that they are feminists. The majority of the material about the movement was sourced from self-proclaimed feminists. But then also, we want to preach the Word of God. Certainly, we want to preach it distinctly and without ambiguity and give the understanding where it may be lacking about this subject of feminism, specifically also the feminine mystique that Betty Friedan wrote. And so with all this said, let's consider some things about feminism. We're not going to get all of it in. I thought I might get some extra time, Brother Poacher, but I don't think that's going to happen. But let's consider the dawn of Mystique. The dawn of Mystique. Betty Friedan authored this book, The Feminine Mystique. And this book, The Feminine Mystique, written by Friedan, I encourage you to read the manuscript about her background. We don't have the time to go into all of that. And there's a common thread that sparked her involvement in women's rights or in women's activism. A common thread is that she saw the deplorable working conditions of women and children during World War II. And some of those conditions were deplorable and they were very terrible. And here's that common thread. There is a discouragement. There's a depression. There is something that happens within their life that causes them to step back and say, well, what's going on? Something that went wrong. And instead of addressing it biblically, they went the opposite direction. And so Freidman was what I would call a part-time women's rights activist, by no means fully engaged in the women's rights struggle, but cognizant of it and sympathetic towards it. So this is where she starts out. She's sympathetic towards the women's rights movement. She's sympathetic to what is going on, but she's not an all-out activist of women's rights. She's kind of just standing on the sidelines, if you will, and just voicing her opinion from time to time. However, when her book came out, or how her book came about, is interesting. Later in life, Freidman was asked by her alma mater, Smith College, to do a review of how college graduates are doing, how they're doing postgraduate life, what is happening in their lives. And so she did this at a reunion. She went to a reunion and she talked to some of her friends, emphasis to some of her friends. She talked to some of the ladies with whom she was befriended, ladies that she knew, and she asked them about how postgraduate life was going. But the survey took a different direction. What was supposed to be an information piece turned into a griping session about their disgruntled lives. And so these women got together and they started griping about how they didn't like their lives, how they were upset about their current situation in the home. Freidman found that many of them were unhappy with their lives as housewives, causing her to begin her research into the feminine mystique. Freidman's book became the bestseller in 1964, and it is said to be the catalyst for second wave feminism. In her book, she addresses various issues confronting women at the time. She began the book with the heading, "The Problem That Has No Name." Along with detailing many ailments befalling women, the following quote sums up the main concept of Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique. She says, "The problem lay buried, unspoken for many years in the midst of American women. It was strange, a strange stirring, a sense of dissatisfaction, a yearning that women suffered in the middle of the 20th century in the United States. Each suburban wife struggled with it alone as she made the beds, shopped for groceries, matched slipcover material, ate peanut butter sandwiches with her children, chauffeured Cub Scouts and brownies lay beside her husband at night. She was afraid to ask, even of herself, the silent question, is this all?" And so she paints the housewife, she paints the homemaker as this individual who is disgruntled. All she can do is eat peanut butter sandwiches with her children. And then when she lays in bed beside her husband at night, she whimpers in silence, "Is this all? Is this what my life has been reduced to?" So this is the information that she received from when she interviewed her friends. According to Freidman, society as a whole, with variant role players, stifled women in reaching their full and better potential. Although comprehensive in nature and certainly bearing out some truths, Freidman's work aimed to throw out the baby with the bathwater. There was no middle ground or sensible solutions to problems. There was just everything but the kitchen sink approach. Everything must go. Everything must change. Not once did it cross her mind that maybe the small group of friends that she interviewed, maybe all of them were having, the problems that they were having were circumstantial. No, she took that small group of friends and then she said everyone in the entire United States must be feeling like that small group of people that she interviewed. And see, the feminist movement was already in full swing before Betty Friedan came along. She just added more grievances to their plight, creating a free-for-all mentality. Whatever they did not like was allowed to become a major issue. If you didn't like it in the home, or if women had something that they didn't like, they would just add it to the feminist list, and that became a major issue. And so anarchy reigns in the absence of balance and sensibility, and that's certainly what happened. Friedan's actions and work stands far above many of her peers. However, the feminist movement did not start with Friedan, nor was it always centered around her ideologies. She is just a small individual, if you will, in this wheel, in this machine of feminism. She came along and she did her part, but really there are others who played their part as well. And so that is the dawn of Mystique, very briefly considered. Number two here, a diversified history, or the diversified history of feminism. According to many scholars, feminism occurred in three waves, even a fourth. The first wave of feminism concerned itself with women's suffrage, women's voting rights. And so the wave of feminism, this wave, can rightly be labeled the purest form of feminism. The first wave of feminism took place in the late 19th and early 20th century. The goal of this wave was to open up opportunities for women with a focus on suffrage. Aside from voting rights, first wave feminists also were concerned about the right for women to own property, to receive equal wages, and to be treated as equals. And so this was a long and arduous fight to secure something that many today take for granted. But finally, 50 years in the making, the 19th Amendment of the United States Constitution prohibited the states and the federal government from denying the right to vote to citizens of the United States on the basis of sex. And so when we consider the plight of these feminists, it was founded upon righteous principles as they were struggling to have equal opportunity to have a say. The equality and worth of men and women alike, as was mentioned earlier, is based upon the scriptures. Is based upon what we read in scriptures in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26, that man was created in the image of God. And therein lies the quality and worth of man and women alike. Acts chapter 17 and verse 26 says, he is made of one blood, all the nations of men who dwell upon the face of the earth. And so women having the same political rights as men is hardly something the Christian should frown at. It's hardly something we should get bent out of shape about. Does she pay taxes? And if she pays taxes, she ought to be represented, because the alternative is taxation without representation, and that didn't go so well, right? So we understand that there are some things that the first wave feminists did that certainly we can agree with. The Lord has not prohibited women from being active members of society. We consider the Proverbs women, the woman of Proverbs chapter 31, and we look at what she did. She was industrious, verses 13 and 14. She was an entrepreneur, verses 16, 17, and also 24. She was skillful and hardworking, verses 19 and 22. And then above all of these things, she was a homemaker. She didn't neglect those things, even though she was all of the other things. Women ought to be paid the same, because any laborer is worthy of his hire, Luke chapter 10 and verse 7. And we'll look at some more of that later. But second wave feminism, or rather first wave feminism, was characterized by those things. And we might rightly call that the purest form of feminism. But let me tell you right now that feminism is gone. That feminism is long gone, and it is dead. It does not look the same anymore, because second wave feminism came about and was characterized by identity politics. Identity politics. In this wave, now this is the wave that Betty Friedan made a name for herself. This wave began in the 1960s and lasted all the way to the 90s. And this era was known for the civil rights movement and the anti-war sentiment. And so here is what they did. Very aptly, you might add, or cunningly would be a better word. These feminists used the platform of equality to promote their own agenda of immorality. What they did is the women's struggles were then labeled as a class struggle. They used what was happening with Dr. Martin Luther King and the struggle for equality. They used that situation and they said, well, we're just going to tag ourselves onto that struggle. And we're going to say that women being homemakers, that women not being allowed to do certain things that they want to do, like murder their babies, that also will become a class struggle. We will put that on par with racism. We'll put the ability not to murder our children on par with racism. And so what they did is they were riding on the coattails of the civil rights movement, and they spoke against what they perceived to be inequalities. And so they very cunningly used that movement to be able to do that. And they still do the same thing today. You might hear them say, well, if you are against homosexuality, they class you in the same category as a racist. They class you in the same category as somebody who is prejudiced. And so we have to understand that, because as Christians, we are against homosexuality, but we understand that we are not prejudiced in that sense or in their view. We are prejudiced in a godly sense, in the sense that we prefer God above their ungodliness, but we're not prejudiced or bigoted in that sense, but that's how they have classified us, and they do it very aptly. And so what this wave of feminism did, they brought in perceived inequalities, or highlighted perceived inequalities, such as women's sexual and reproductive rights. The inability to murder their children in the womb was considered a form of oppression. The Roe v. Wade decision that was handed down was a great victory for them. They considered it a great victory. That's why a lot of women with purple hair were crying a couple of months ago, because it got overturned and handed back to the states. Because they considered that to be their great victory of the time. In talking about the success of the movement and about Roe v. Wade, the feminist wrote the following. A feminist wrote the following. The pill, on the one hand, allowed women to delay childbirth and establish careers in many cases. Abortion also gave women greater choices about rearing children. This is how they talked about murdering children. They're talking about it as if it is nothing. Abortion gave us just another opportunity to think about what we're going to do with our lives. Their cavalier attitude with which the woman viewed abortion is truly an indication that many of them were without natural affection. As Brother Hall mentioned on yesterday, they were like brute beasts. They're like animals. They're without natural affection, because they can look at their offspring and they can just say, we're just going to murder it. We're just going to murder our own children and think nothing of it, so that they can work a 9 to 5. That's what they're going to do. And so we understand that second wave feminism, they brought this to light, or this was one of their plights, one of their problems that they had, women's sexual and reproductive rights. But then also second wave feminism took a stance against heteronormativity. Heteronormativity. Now, what is heteronormativity? Well, the dictionary says it is noting or relating to behavior or attitudes consistent with traditional male or female gender roles and the assumption of heterosexuality as the norm. So in terms that we can understand, heteronormativity is, in the beginning, God made them male and female. And so that is heteronormativity, is that there is male and that there is female and there is nothing else. And so what they did is they took a stance against heteronormativity. They have not read and they do not believe the way God created us was a good thing. They say there's an evil thing, or it is an evil thing because it has too many limitations. Because now you only have man and you only have woman, but we want to have more than that so that we can engage in our ungodliness. And so thus they started making distinctions between sex and gender, the former being biological and the latter being a construct of culture and society. They started making that distinction in order to get away from this heteronormativity, in order to get away from this male and female. And from this mindset sprang the now popular toxic masculinity and trying to get males in touch with their non-existent feminine sides. Let me just tell you, ladies, don't ask your husband to get in touch with his feminine side because he doesn't have one, right? And if he had one, he shouldn't be getting in touch with it, right? But this is what they did. They said, well, men need to get in touch with their feminine side. It was very popular during that time. You know, you need to be more feminine. You need to be more soft. Men's biblical role as the head and breadwinner was also abdicated for a more palatable, culturally palatable, stay-at-home dad type. You see, and so they wanted to kind of change the way men are viewed. And so we're going to take him out of the workplace and we're going to put him in the home. And he's going to take care of the children. He's going to be the one in the kitchen, if you will. And I'm not saying that men can't cook. You know, they probably shouldn't. But, you know, some of them at least. I know I shouldn't. But these are the views that they have. They want to take men out of the workplace and we want to domesticate them. And I use that word, I use that word sincerely and I use that word aptly. They want to domesticate them. They want to break them down, essentially put them in an environment that they were not meant for. Please understand, women have been created to be homemakers. God, that's what God says. They've been created for that purpose. They are apt to do that. They can do that better than we could ever. Men have been created to provide for their families, to go out and work. That's what they've been created to do. And so what they've done is they've taken men out of his natural environment and placed him in this environment because that was more palatable to them, because they're trying to change the entire paradigm that God has set in place. Even today, it happens even in the church. It happens in the church. We have young men who play video games all day while their wives are out working. Imagine that nonsense, Terrence. You're sitting around all day and playing video games and your wife is out working. Does that even make you feel good? Right? How do you sleep at night as a man when you allow your wife to slave away out there in the world and you're out here just doing whatever you want to do? That's ridiculous. And so the nuclear family did not escape the sights of the second wave feminism either. Feminists during this age believed that women were still being oppressed by being homemakers and mothers. They fought hard against what they called the domesticity of woman after World War II. In this, Betty Friedan made a name for herself by one of her famous quotes. "We can no longer ignore the voice," she says, "within women that says, I want something more than my husband and my children at home. I want something more than my husband and my children at home." How should the husband feel and the children feel? As she looks at them and says, "Listen, I want more than you," right? "You're not enough for me. I want something better than you." Certainly one cannot deny that there were some warped ideologies about women in the home held by men and women alike during that time. Yet their answer to this anecdotal problem was a complete rejection of God-given roles in the home. And so this is what second feminism did. They accomplished the murdering of babies. They attacked the home and heteronormativity. But then there was a third wave of feminism. As we move through time, third wave of feminism comes in and ushers in, and it has more of a postmodern mindset. Feminism now is completely turned on its head. We understand what postmodernism is. It's been talked about before in one of the lessons. It is that all concrete truths were subject to varying interpretation. Essentially, there is no absolute truth. That's postmodernism. And so feminism went into this postmodern phase where there was no real absolute truth about feminism. And so what they did is femininity was reclaimed and rebranded. Femininity was reclaimed and rebranded. Notice what they say. An aspect of third wave feminism that mystified the mothers of the earlier feminist movement was the readoption by young feminists of the very lipstick, high heels, and cleavage, proudly exposed, low-cut necklines that the first two phases of the movement identified with male oppression. And so dressing provocatively became a sign of femininity, not immodesty. So in first wave feminism would look at that as saying that was male oppression. They would say that if a male, why would a male want a woman to dress provocatively, right? If it's not to objectify her, right? It's not because they want to dress them in that way so that they can, I think you look good in that. No, it's so that they can objectify them. And so first wave feminism understood that. But what they did is turn this thing completely over on their head and said, well, listen, we're going to dress provocatively. And so they became then that which they despised. They went from don't objectify me by my clothing to let me objectify myself by my clothing and indict any man for daring to look as I objectify myself by my clothing, right? And so we understand that they've lost their minds. It seems like these women were just looking for a fight. They were just looking for someone to go against. But not only did femininity reclaim and rebrand themselves, derogatory phrases were appropriated in third wave feminism. Terms that defamed women were used by women to describe themselves. This was done, and I quote, in order to subvert sexist culture and to deprive it of its verbal weapons. It sounds like something someone like that would say. They were calling themselves derogatory names in an attempt to remove power from those who called them derogatory names. Romans chapter 1 and verse 22 has an answer for that. They are morons. They are morons. It says, professing themselves to be wise, they became moros. They became fools. Imagine, if you will, people out there are calling me a fool, and then I say, I'm going to show you something. I'm going to start calling myself a fool, right? That'll teach you. And you're walking around calling yourself a fool, and you think you're wise for doing that. That's exactly what they did. They took derogatory terms that were used against them, and they said, we're going to call ourselves by those derogatory terms. But not only was there derogatory phrases appropriated, femininity was reclaimed, there was also descriptive terms that were rejected. in an attempt to accommodate those in third-wave feminism who were non-binary, third-wave feminists rejected the term feminist. So now you know the movement has completely lost its mind, but now you can't say that you're a feminist anymore because that's not right. Wait a second, I thought we were about women. No, we're not about women. It says, and I quote, most third-wavers refuse to identify as feminists and reject the word that they find limiting and exclusionary. Girl feminism, or GRRL feminism, tends to be global, multicultural, and it shuns simple answers or artificial categories of identity, gender, and sexuality. It is transversal, or its transversal politics means that differences such as those of ethnicity, class, sexual orientation, etc., are celebrated and recognized as dynamic, situational, and provisional. In deriding in derision about what they said, one writer says women were fighting in the suffrage movements for years, protesting and doing parades also that they could vote. Nowadays, you see modern feminists dyeing their armpit hair different colors and walking around topless, all in the name of what exactly? When did not shaving become a form of oppression? Right? I'm going to go out on a limb and say that they were not oppressed, they were bored. They were bored, as many of these young people are. And so what third wave feminism did is they said, we want to be more inclusive because obviously there are biological men who are now identified as women. And so we can't call it feminism. We have to be inclusive of everyone. So third wave feminism, being ushered in here with postmodern ideas, just turn feminism on its head. And then we can come to fourth wave feminism as it is today, which is marred by ambiguity. Feminist Martha Rampton believes there is a fourth wave and a growing fourth wave. She believes fourth wavers are not keen on the idea of being called feminist because it is too exclusive. She says the generation now coming of age sees that we face serious problems because of the way society genders and is gendered, and we need strong, in-your-face, word-to-word combat to combat those problems. Feminism is no longer just refers to the struggles of women. It is a clarion call for gender equity. And so feminism is no longer about feminism. Feminism is about homosexuality. Feminism is about transgenderism. That's what feminism is about. In a nutshell, fourth wave feminism is described in Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32. That's how fourth wave feminism is described. It is a free-for-all. It is we are on the side of everything that is ungodly. If it is ungodly, that is what we're going to be promoting. If it is against God, especially relating to male and female relationships, that's what we're going to be promoting. And that is where you find most feminists today. If a person is a feminist today, then they are ambiguous in what they believe, in the sense that it's all over the place. It's everything goes. The feminist movement went from women fighting for the right to participate in society to championing the rights of confused individuals who are militant about the pronouns by which they are called. It is absolutely astounding. There is a distressing fact, though, that we must mention here. We don't have the time to take in all of that. A distressing fact that we might mention, as I mentioned in the manuscript as well, I believe it would be unfair and ignorant to claim that the plight of inequality is completely unfounded. In no way or shape or form do we want to give the impression that all is well with how women have been treated and are still treated in certain parts of the world. We understand that women have been abused, treated like property, viewed as insignificant, lesser than men, treated unfairly, and stripped of their God-given rights and dignity. And so we have to identify that and we have to recognize that. And certainly that should not once be named among those who are called by the name of Christ. The Lord does not condone any of these actions new to the Swedish people. Why? Because she is his daughter, created in his image. Women are. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created him, male and female. We don't treat women with disrespect. Listen, you don't want God on your case. Imagine if you treated somebody's daughter with disrespect. You don't want their father on your case, right? Right? You don't want their father on you. What do you think God's going to do to you? You treat his daughter with such disrespect, right? You don't want to be on God's bad side. It's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God, the Hebrews writer says. And so thus, men cannot claim superiority over women in worth any more than women can claim superiority over men in worth. And so we have to understand that concept. But let's move on and let's just conclude with some of these thoughts with 2 points here. Number one, a dissent with prejudice. A dissent with prejudice. We have to dissent against the modern feminist movement. We have to dissent against Betty Friedan and what she wrote. We can readily agree with some of the tenets of first-wave feminism, but that is where our agreement ends. Beyond first-wave feminism, we cannot agree, and we must dissent with extreme prejudice. Feminism, as it is understood and practiced today, is marred by ungodliness, and we dissent with prejudice against, number one, its misinformation. Propaganda seems to be the chief tool of the postmodern and modern-day feminists. They want supremacy, not equality, and they are not above lying to get it. There is the all-famous wage gap lie, right? They report it always. There's a wage gap between women and men. Did you know that women get paid less than men doing the same job, they say? And women get paid 0.77 cents to every dollar a man makes. Where? Where in the world is this happening? It's certainly not in this country. It can't be in this country because it has been illegal since 1963, thanks to the Equal Pay Act. It is illegal to pay a woman less than a man doing the same job. If she were paid less than a man, then she could go to court and sue her employers and say, well, listen, these people are paying me less and I'm doing the same job. In 2017, however, Audi had an ad in the Super Bowl with a scrappy little girl in a boxcar race. Her father asked the question, do I tell her that despite her education, her skills, her drive, her intelligence, she will automatically be valued as less than every man she ever meets? That's in 2017. Audi is making this commercial as if women are being oppressed. She just will be valued less than every man she ever meets. That is nonsense. That is utter nonsense. T-Mobile had the same spot, and they assured a group of adorable babies, you will demand fair and equal pay. You will be heard, and you will not be dismissed. Right? This is what they are peddling to the world. If any woman is a victim of fiscal discrimination, the law is on their side. But then also, not only is it misinformation about the wage gap lie, there's also the equality lie. Today's feminists are still marching under the banner of equality and claim to be standing for the same principles as their predecessors. When you listen to their rhetoric, it is as if this nation is one law away from confining women to concentration camps. They say they are fighting for equality for women. What rights are women lacking? I'll wait. What rights are you lacking? What legitimate oppressions are you facing? Women in the United States have more freedoms than rights than women in most in the world. Most women in the world go to the Middle East. They can't even get a driver's license. They can't even have an education. Women are considered lower than men, considerably lower than men. They are worth absolutely nothing. They are but property. Your oppression is what? A long line at Starbucks, right? That's the oppression of women in this nation, certainly. But we understand they say they want equality for all women, but we know this is also not true. We don't have the time to go into all of the quotes. I would invite your attention to the manuscript. But then also, we are against not only their misinformation, we are also against their defamation, the defamation of the heterosexual men. Men are stupid, right? Men are stupid. Sorry, John Hall, I know your kid is here. Don't say that. Men are idiotes, right? Men are idiotes. And so we defame them in movies and television. They are always the butt of jokes, right? Mom knows best and dad is an idiot. Propaganda is rich in TV shows. They are rich in these children's shows where they always portray dad as this bumbling fool who doesn't know what he is doing. It's going on for so long. And our kids grow up with that same mindset. And they look at dad as this fool, and mom is the one who knows best. They know what they're doing. Then there's the ever popular toxic masculinity. We are told male nature itself is the problem, and the solution is a deconstruction of our understanding of what it means to be a man. And so our young boys are being told there is something wrong with how they were created. They don't want men to get in touch with their feminine side. They want men to become feminine. That's how they view men today. And when you look around society, I was talking to Terrence about this, you look around society and you look at the young men, and some of them look like they're wearing their sister's clothing, and some of them look like their sisters. And I say that in all sincerity. There is an effeminate nature that is so prevalent among our young men today. Men are no longer men. They don't act like men. They don't talk like men. They certainly don't dress like men. And so they have accomplished what they desire to accomplish. If men were so toxic, please explain the statistics that tell us that when there is not a father present in the home, that trouble arises. And so consider also not only the defamation of the male, the defamation of homemaking. I have to move quickly here. But then also there is the defamation of the hierarchy. The student of the Bible must conclude that God has not set limitations on women being in leadership roles. You want to run a company? That's great. You want to go into politics? Hey, that's great. I don't encourage it, but that's great in a secular setting. But when it comes to his home and his church, there is a divine hierarchy. God has set a hierarchy in place. The husband is the head of the home. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 and 24. The husband's the head of the home. I remember a while back, a young man was in services. They was with their family. They were visiting there for a couple of times now. And this individual was running on the pews. The child was running on the pews while I was preaching. Dad's sitting right there. Mom is sitting right there. And he's running on the pews and he's going back and forth. And at one point I said, young man, sit down. He looked at me with big eyes and he sat down. And then his father afterwards says, I'm so sorry, my wife just let him she just let him do whatever he wants to do. And I want to spank him, but my wife, I said, Ephesians 5:23, brother. He said, train up a child in the way. I said, no, brother, that's not the verse. That's not the verse. I said, you go look up that verse, right? And so he had abdicated, and the result was evident as we see in his home. And so this is what we have to speak out against and dissent against their abominations about the LGBTQ, whatever. The feminist movement has become the mouthpiece for homosexuality, and we have to speak out against that. We have to speak out against their my choice, my body. Well, frankly, it is not your body, so it cannot be your choice. A body with a completely different genetic code who advocates for that body, which is inside of you. It is not your body, so we dissent against all of those things. There is a detrimental outcome for these individuals. And I'll finish with just the highlights of these. Your path leads to humiliation. Feminists, your path leads to humiliation. You will be brought low. It is pride that encompasses them, that shrouds them. The modern attitude of the feminists in their speeches, in their writings, they are proud and they are arrogant. You will be brought low. The Lord of heaven will bring you low. Proverbs 16 and verse 18. Your path leads to oppression. We have to understand that these individuals want supremacy. They don't want equality. And they don't want to just live together with others. They want to rule over others. Your path leads to denigration. The denigration of society because righteousness exalts a nation. The denigration of individuals. Your path will lead to destruction. Fourth wave feminism, third wave and second wave feminism, there is no place in God's heaven for that type of mindset. Not at all. God wants your salvation, but you cannot receive it on the path on which you are right now. Let me end by saying this. Betty Friedan is burning in the Aegean realm and is asking Abraham to send someone to warn her fellow sisters not to read this. And Abraham is saying the same thing to her as he did to that rich man. They have the Word of God. Thank you for your attention.